Okay, I think we're ready to go. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Jim Cuno, and I'm the President and CEO of the J. Paul Getty Trust, and it's a great pleasure to be in your company this evening. This evening's presentation, of course, is part of Pacific Standard Time, that 6-month festival exploring and presenting the artistic legacy of Southern California, Los Angeles certainly, but Southern California from 1945 to 1980. Here's a chance in which we get to see on stage at one time one of the great facts about that legacy, which is that it was produced by a community of artists. And we will have them around Frank here this evening. You should know, if you haven't, that this is the culmination of 10 years of involvement of the Getty with colleagues across the region. 10 years to identify, preserve, document, present, collect this archive that was at some risk of being lost, an archive that will now be preserved forever for all to study and to enjoy. So we're thrilled by this project and thrilled by the Getty's involvement in it. And tonight's just one of the many aspects of this project. Some 68 different cultural institutions all over the region. I hope you've seen all 68 such exhibitions. If you haven't, you've got some time. It's a 6-month-long project. And I know you'll be here and elsewhere between January 19th and January 29th for the Public Art and Performance Festival. Don't miss it. That'll take you back to the early 70s. Okay, so the Pacific Standard Time. But tonight we're going to hear from Frank Gehry and some of his artist friends as they consider the importance of community in the early formative years of Frank's architectural practice. Born in Toronto, Frank moved to Los Angeles in 1947, and he tried a few things before settling down to architecture. As he once recalled, I was a truck driver in LA, going to City College, and I tried radio announcing, which I wasn't very good at. I tried chemical engineering, which I wasn't very good at and didn't like. And then I remembered, somehow I just started racking my brain about what do you like? Where was I? What made me excited? And I remembered art. That I loved going to museums, and I loved looking at paintings, loved listening to music. Those things came from my mother, who took me to concerts and museums. I remembered Grandma and the blocks. His grandmother would give him blocks to play with, and he would make little buildings and cities of little buildings. And just on a hunch, I tried some architecture classes. He then went on to USC School of Architecture, and he graduated in 1954, and he worked a variety of jobs, including service in the United States Army. And then he studied city planning at Harvard for a year. And in 1957, he started the law firm with the law firm of Victor Gruen and Associates before starting his own firm in 1962. Frank has always been interested in the visual arts and always been attracted to artists. 2 years ago, in an interview in the LA Times, he acknowledged that, in his words, "From the beginning of my adult life, I've always related more to artists than to architects. I found it easier and more exciting to be with them. When I was studying at USC, art and architecture were taught in the same building, Harris Hall, and some of the classes were in the same rooms. So the entire time I was at USC studying architecture, I was exposed to the USC art program. Because I had been a member of the art program, I kept trying to bring the two groups together. It was like they were on two different planets, and I could never figure that out. So I lived this kind of double life while I was in architecture school, which I guess is what I continue to do. And when I finished architecture school, I liked Kahn and Corbusier and other architects, but I still felt there was something more that the artists were doing. They were pushing into a visual language, and I thought that if a visual language could apply to art, which it obviously could, it could also apply to architecture. Now, ever honest, Frank has noted the discomfort some architects, and even some artists, have felt with his artistic sensibilities as they express themselves in his architecture. There are some artists, he once said, who are offended when he used the word art for a building that has toilets in it. So to support their narrow-mindedness, I avoid use of the term, but history has acknowledged that Bernini was an artist as well as an architect, and so was Michelangelo. It's possible that an architect can also be an artist. Tonight we're going to hear more about this, I imagine, and much more about the community of creative people with whom Frank worked and played in the early years when his hair was browned and he sported a rebelliously bushy mustache. Joining Frank in conversation this evening will be Peter Alexander, Chuck Arnoldi, Larry Bell, Billy Al Bengston, Tony Berlant, and Ed Moses. The conversation will be moderated by Rani Singh, Senior Research Associate at the Getty Research Institute. It's my pleasure to introduce Rani Singh.
Welcome, and thank you, everybody, for coming tonight. It's a truly historical event, and we're honored to have such a regal group assembled. Frank Gehry, one of the world's most influential architects, and artists Ed Moses, Billy Al Bengston, Peter Alexander, Chuck Arnoldi, Tony Berlant, and Larry Bell have been friends for almost 50 years. The foundation of their artistic practice was born from similar seeds, but has grown in varied directions, from stick figure structures, glass cubes and walls, resin boxes and dented aluminum paintings, to high-rise skyscrapers and concert halls with soaring stainless steel skins. Aesthetically and artistically, they've matured together as artists. But most impressively, in their 60s, 70s, and even into their 80s, they're all still making work, and they're at the top of their game. They've been catalysts for one another's ideas in essential ways, going to each other's studios and looking at each other's work, sharing ideas, and sometimes even girlfriends, intimate connections with more than a dose of healthy competition. All of our guests tonight deal with the relationship between sculptural form and space in some way. Even more than most artists, tonight's guests are builders. Several of the artists have a background in architecture. Peter Alexander trained as an architect at USC in Berkeley, and he also worked for Neutra and William Pereira for a time. Ed Moses, who early on had architectural aspirations and went on to design artist studios, home additions, and even the Chapelet Winery in Napa Valley. Larry Bell and Billy Al Bengston both have designed interiors and furniture. But all of these artists are not simply about making discrete objects, but total living environments, spaces that reflect their personalities. As anyone will realize when you step into Chuck Arnoldi's studio, a former potato chip factory in Venice, or Tony Berlant's former drugstore in Santa Monica. There's also a long history of direct collaboration among the group, from Rebecca's Restaurant to the Hollywood Bowl, the Habitability Conference, or Walt Disney Concert Hall. But tonight we'll discuss not only the literal collaborations, but the overwhelming interest in materials that ties Frank and these artists together. The ability to use objects around them, strip down the studs, expose the beams, using things that may have been construed as detritus, and repurposing them as sheathing on a building, dividers in a museum exhibition, or the interior structure of a sculpture. This intense engagement with materials and decades of friendship brings our group together. The history of these artists and their interactions is a lot like Kurosawa's film Rashomon. The version of the story you get depends on who you talk to. So tonight is really a perfect opportunity for us to get everyone together in a room and get the story straight, or at least one version of it. So I just want to mention, everyone, if you could turn off your cell phones and please no flash photography. And I would like everybody to join me in welcoming Peter Alexander, Chuck Arnoldi, Larry Bell, Billy Al Bengston, Tony Berlant, Ed Moses, and Frank Gehry. Bob in the audience? Mr. Irwin? Frank is asking. He's supposed to come, but he might want to remain incognito.
He should be up here.
I know he should be up here. We could fill the audience, but you see we have a full array of guests this evening.
Is there anybody else missing?
It's going to be hard to have a conversation, but we're going to try.
We can discuss who should have been here that isn't.
So Frank, as Jim mentioned in his introduction, you've always spoken about being more connected to the artists than the architects, and that the gestalt of the architects in the 60s when you were starting your practice was really not to engage new ideas. What was it about this somewhat motley crew that attracted you?
Well, the architecture world had a lot of rules. They still do. There's certain stylistic periods, and if you don't stick within them, then that means certain things have to be done a certain way. And I never could accept that, so I got in trouble in school. But when I got out of school, and went through lived and did a lot of stuff. I came back to LA and started making my own buildings with real clients. They were stupid little buildings, tiny. Some of the architects, I won't mention names, because a few of them are still alive.
They could be here.
They probably are. Were very upset with what I was doing. I mean, I really upset them, and I couldn't figure out why. I mean, I liked all of them. I thought we were brothers, and I still like them all. But they were very disparaging, and I'd go to the job site, and there was a guy. He was younger. Where are you, Ed? That guy, who I knew all about most of their work from.
And the job site was the Danziger building.
Yeah, and there was Ed, and he was poking around, and asked me a few questions. And then he asked me to design an addition to his house in the canyon somewhere. And I went and had dinner with he and his wife, and then I said, great. And then I told him it would cost $300. And I didn't see him again.
We became friends, Frank.
Yeah.
But Ed, is that your version of the story? Because
No, I have a different
I know,
version.
that's what And maybe we could put the slide of the Danziger building
Not
up.
a different version, but a different memory. There was a woman by the name of Lily Fanischel.
Oh, yeah. I forgot that
Sort of
part.
around the scene. And I asked her about an architect. I wanted to make an addition. I had a little house on Beverly Glen Place. Kenny Price was adjacent to that place with Happy in the early days. And I said, do you know anybody? She said, I'll give you a name. It happened to be Frank Gehry, and Frank came up. He had a blue suit and cordovan shoes on. And I said,
did.
Uh-oh, this is dangerous. He remembers too much.
I said, okay, so I said it's too much. I can't afford that.
300 bucks.
And then later on, I went to see the Lou Danziger building, and I saw the building with columns on Robertson that you did. Do you remember that building?
On Fairfax.
Is it Fairfax?
It's still there.
Still there. And we became fast friends. And then I introduced him around to my various friends because he had an insatiable appetite and curiosity for the arts. I'd never met an architect that had that view or interest. They're all very insulated in their own vertical, horizontal box. And Frank was the kind of guy that said, I'm not going along with that vertical, horizontal box. I'm going to make things that soar. So we talked about Longchamp. Was that the name of the place that
Yeah.
Corbeau did with the
Longchamp?
ceiling that soars off like that?
Yeah, yeah.
And that's all history after that. Frank turned the whole thing inside out and became a genius that none of us knew. We thought it was just another putz pissing on our parade. I think that's what Billy's comment was. Who is that little putz that you bring around all the time?
But the Danziger building is actually a good example of that because it was very much a classical cube structure, and you were trying to experiment with some different materials, right, Frank, and experimenting with blown on stucco, and this was something new for the time.
Yeah, they were doing it under freeways, that kind of thing. And I got the guy that did that under the freeway to come to Venice, and somebody loaned me a garage of theirs, and we sprayed it on, and that's what we tested it, and that's where we did it. After that, it was done a lot of.
And the Faith Plating Company as well?
That came before this, yeah.
So it was kind of experiments in that.
That's it there, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. But was it was there something
Faith
about?
plating happened because I worked at Gruen with Fred Usher and a lot of people from the Eames office, and Louis Danziger, graphics guy, asked Fred to design his studio here, and Fred said he would get me to do it, and he would help me. And so Lou wanted a studio for his graphics company and a little house to live in. So the one on the right is his apartment, the one on the left is a studio. And then we finished the thing, and he put a pool table in there, and he played pool for the next 5 years.
He was great. He was real good.
What year was that?
64.
You did that in '64?
Yeah.
Took you that long?
That's the that's the first building of yours that I saw.
Yeah.
Was that one? I went over there to look at it because somebody told me it was worth looking at.
What'd you think?
I was really disappointed.
You didn't see the apartment house,
No, I didn't.
Which apartment house?
the one you were living in.
Oh,
You remember that.
no, I don't want to.
What was it about your architecture that made the other architects mad at you? I mean, what was it you were doing that they weren't seeing as okay?
I think they didn't like the windows.
The windows?
Yeah,
Was it just too simple for them?
They're set back. You see, the windows are
Yeah.
set back. There's a kind of, I don't know. Who knows?
Seems pretty straightforward to
Jealousy
me.
is what it is.
Yeah, but they had another agenda.
You know what Kenny
Because
said.
they were just a tight group of people, and you weren't on the inside.
But it seems like there's something about this group that, that they were a little bit experimental and trying different materials, and
Well,
Larry
and
was
my-
using glass and opening studs, and Ed is designing different buildings, additions to Laura Lee Stern's home and opening things up. I mean, there's,
Speaking of that, Laura Lee Stern, was it you who did the wall with the
Yes.
Kenny's Cup? It was you who cut the hole in the sheetrock?
Well, what happened is that it was framed. And I said, don't put any windows in. Let it get framed, and then walk around and see where you want to see out. And that was one of the places. So it still had the diagonal bracing and a little shelf, and I put a Kenny Price cup there and
Yeah.
put glass on both sides.
Yeah,
That was the only thing
that's what I
did there.
remember.
So that was you.
But that was you who did it. Kenny didn't do it. You did it.
No.
no, that was Ed that did that.
Yeah.
And Larry did his toilet.
The
same way.
was pretty
Yeah,
amazing.
that was great. He put glass over the plumbing
Yeah.
behind
And the concrete was coming
commode.
through the lap.
And
Laughing
then I did the Russian constructivist show where I left all the studs exposed because I always like buildings the tract houses under construction.
But was it actually the Bengston show at LACMA that came first?
I don't know.
I think it was. So maybe, I mean, you designed the exhibition for Billy Al Bengston's retrospective that was at LACMA.
And I had a statue made of him. And when he saw it, he freaked. And he didn't freak about the statue, but his favorite boots for motorcycle riding, in order to make that work, we had to drill a hole through the boot.
It was a left boot, too.
He's never forgiven me.
So what was that collaboration like? I mean, Billy Al, maybe you can talk a little bit about that. What was the back and forth in terms of deciding what the look that you both wanted for the show? It was very
Did we decide on
untraditional.
a look?
Well, it was very untraditional than a standard
the
museum
difference is,
exhibition.
in those days, museums weren't as tight-ass as they are now. And you could do things that you wanted to do, and they didn't go around with light meters and
Well-
checklists and all that crap, and we just did what we wanted to do. Frank was doing what he wanted to do, and I did what I wanted to do.
So I think it was Tuckman asked me to do it.
Yeah, Maurice Tuckman, who was the,
And I had done some things with raw plywood and stuff, and so they took me in and they said, you can't do that here. This is a museum. You can't. And so they weren't going to buy any raw plywood. So I went down to the storage room, and they had a lot of plywood that had already been painted, and I used that. It looked pretty crummy.
It was
Looked
a
great.
step up.
Yeah, but Billy told me that the best thing for him was to get one of those roller things you stack paintings in that you roll around.
I did.
A rack, a rolling storage rack. And he said, get a couple of those and put the paintings in and put it in the middle of the room. That's fine. He did. And
Nobody cooperates.
Yeah, but what you do, I remember you're coming by the house and saying, I want furniture for the show. So you took a globe, a world globe that I had.
I borrowed that from you?
Yeah, and a few other things that were really special.
Yes.
Yeah, but
That's
But,
Duchesne's
no,
couch.
but I'll tell you what was, to me, what was really significant about that show was it was the most intimate that I had ever felt in an institution because of the way you guys did it. So,
But also, perhaps you should say that Billy L. had what he called his artist studio. And in his home, he would have the setup in which he would move things around and install work and
yeah,
have
so
people over.
I was just replicating that because Billy would change his studio. I think he still does. Every 2 weeks, you'd go there for drinks or dinner, and it was different. The living room was in a different place. The bedroom was somewhere else. It was in a loft. It was in somewhere. I mean, and I always thought he was the best decorator I'd ever met.
I still am. And I have a short attention span.
So the idea was somewhat to replicate that casual feel of the home artist studio.
Yeah, but the whole idea was that there were no rules. There were no, you did and worked intuitively. That's what attracted me to them, that intuitive willingness to do something and suffer the consequences, which was very brave. I mean, you look back at the work they did in that period, and now it was pretty brave stuff compared to what was going on. And I think that all of us, me in architecture, them in art, benefited from not being on the East Coast. This would never have happened back there because everybody was sniffing up each other's butt back there. Everybody's too close, right? But I guess we were sniffing up each other.
I think that's more like it.
Younger butts.
But there was
we
a
were
little
beautiful.
snafu, though, in the
But it was
installation.
It was freer because the press wasn't interested at that time, except for a few guys.
Are they yet?
Well, you got a lot of press at the beginning, and so did Larry.
Huh. Did anybody look at the carpet of this place? Jeez.
Yeah, I think that carpet is still at LA County.
Really?
But Frank, tell us, so initially you rented furniture.
Well, the idea was to build these rooms with Billy's stuff and Billy's friend's stuff, and Billy was not cooperative. It was a pain in the ass to him. He was over there painting. He didn't want to talk about it. And so the 11th hour was coming, and I didn't know what to do, so I went to Tuckman and I said, we need to get some furniture, so I think the only thing we can do is call one of those furniture rental places. And I ordered a living room, a dining room, four rooms of furniture. And the rental agency came and delivered them and placed them. And Tuckman called me, and he was freaked. And I went over and looked, and I mean, accidentally, we made quite a statement, which had nothing to do with Billy. And when Billy saw it, he freaked, and everybody started yelling at everybody. And we had to get it out of there, which then energized everybody to bring furniture. So it worked in the long run, but I don't know if pictures were taken of that.
Nobody brought furniture. I rounded it all
You
up.
got it all.
Yeah,
I picked it up.
I know, because I freaked you out with that stuff, right?
Yeah, it was your fault.
Okay.
So you had to go around, maybe you can tell us, you got a little bit from everybody.
Well, Ed Jance's living room was.
It's most Ed Jance's stuff, and then the big day bed, of course, is Rouché's. And I don't know who the rugs are.
And the
There's some
inflated
blow-up.
couch.
The inflated couch came from Jan's. The most distinctive thing there was a show of Westerman at the same time, and before I knew that Westerman was having a show there, I'd installed a piece of his in my show, because I get lonely looking at my shit all the time. You know, it's no good. So that's probably the only thing I did that was really distinctive.
But when the shows were being installed, Westerman was next door, and he walked around on his hands, right? Remember?
We did.
Together.
We both did.
You did too? Anyway, I'm in there, and this guy's upside down, he's talking to me. And he could do it for an hour, he could do that,
He was a hand balancer.
yeah.
Well, then you said at the opening,
We
Billy,
walked in together up the stairs on our hands.
I would love to see an image of that. That's a classic.
I'm not
They didn't
sure.
have cameras in those days. Not everybody had a camera with them.
I think
It-
Julian Wasser was always on the spot.
No, he wasn't, unfortunately, or fortunately. But he was there too much of the time.
And you also had a room of Black Panther posters, and
I was fond of them.
so tell us,
In this show?
yeah.
Yeah, there's the Panthers.
I
there.
don't remember.
Well, you can't remember everything.
Nothing in.
It made it possible for me to get by all the guards and everything at night and stay there all night long because the guards were abused, and I was on their team. When was the last time an artist was allowed to do anything in a museum? Don't they have assigned people to do that all the time? And you can't touch anything?
They're under the union,
Yeah, that's true.
so you can't go up on a ladder.
No, you couldn't do anything, and I could do anything I wanted to there. It was sort of terrific. I took out a lot of ceiling tiles. And stuff
But Frank,
like
you
that.
said once the show was installed, you got a call from Rico Mizuno.
Not this show.
I thought it was this show.
No. So this was before the Russian. So I did the Russian show, and I did a lot of walls, like with the, not like that, with the wood exposed, the wood framing.
The open beam and framing.
Yeah, it looked like a tract house, half finished, kind of. And the Russian stuff worked really well with that. And I got a call after the opening. I remember Ed was there at the opening, and he didn't talk to me very much. And that was strange. But the next morning, I got a call from Rico Mizuno, who speaks with a Japanese accent, kind of. And she said, "Frank-san, Ed mad at you."
She's a real troublemaker. wasn't she?
Is she here tonight?
No.
Rico is the
Yeah.
most significant art dealer in town.
So she said, "Ed mad at you," and I said, "Why?" And she said, "You remember Lolly Bell Toilet?" I said, "Yes." "You remember Laura Stern Window?" I said, "Yes." "You rip Ed off."
But so, Ed, what was the project that you did at her gallery, one of the things that she was referring to?
Well, I took the roof off in 3 stages. And Terrell, by the way, was my assistant. He helped me do some of the drywalling. There is the room there with the shadows from the roof. I took it off in stages. And the light came through the roofing after I cut out the tar paper above that and made these figurations. And they'd start on one side in the morning, and then by the end of the day, they'd crawl out the ceiling. And then the last weekend, I got Matt Kivlin and one other guy to come and cut the roof all the way out. So we'd have a sky piece. That was the idea. And it was blue, and it was a big rectangle, and it wouldn't be interrupted. It just looked like a flat blue ceiling, except if a bird or a cloud or whatever went by it, interrupted that thing. And it was a lot of fun. It was a great piece.
Hey, Jim ripped you off.
Terrell had no morals.
Well, and also, at one point, you both went together on a trip to Greece and Israel?
Frank and I,
Yes,
yes.
I know.
Yes,
Ken-
that was a great trip, by the way.
We had a lunch one day at somewhere in Venice, and Kenny Price, I remember he had smoked something, and said, you know, you and Ed should go look at the origins of the world together.
Western culture.
Yeah.
The seeds of Western
The
culture.
seats of Western culture.
So I had just gotten married, and Ed had just gotten divorced. So it was a little complicated. And so we were going to go to Israel first, then Greece, then Egypt. We had tickets to do all this, pre-bought tickets and stuff. So we got to Israel and looked around there.
But we were introduced to Isaac Perlman and Teddy, whatever his name was, the mayor.
Teddy Kollek, yeah.
Yeah. And you knew this violinist that was here at one time, and she introduced us around a little bit.
Yeah, you were after her, kind of.
I wouldn't doubt it.
She was.
She was married, and her husband was there. And they told us how little money they made.
Yeah,
In Israel, no one makes any money.
yeah. That's the trip where we went to a bar, and there was a hooker there, and it was the first Jewish hooker. I never thought. Oh, God. And then we went to Greece.
And that was a great scene there because you introduced me to the idea of the Acropolis that had been turned on axis. So the buildings didn't line up like this, they were rotated. And I never paid any attention. Frank pointed that out. They were in the process of reproducing the Acropolis because the air there was disintegrating the whole thing, so they were going to make a complete reproduction of it and put it under some dome. There's Frank and I at, where was that, Frank?
Olympus.
Yeah, I think it was. We're in Delphi.
And then we went to Delphi.
Yeah.
And
Some guy that had a camera took that picture of us. There we are.
And Frank, shortly after that, when you came back, you actually cut your trip short, didn't you, and came back?
do you want to hear that? Should we tell them now? So in Greece, Ed wanted to go out, have fun. And I was kind of stodgy. And then we met some lady who was a historian, and I remember that. And we talked to her, and then I went to bed. So I went back to the hotel, and Ed calls me to the hotel room, and he says, "Get dressed, come down here right away. This is amazing." And he had two big tall girls, beautiful, and a little short girl.
Right. You remember, that's good. And then the plate routine.
And he said, "We're going out to a place where they throw plates and stuff." And so we did. And I didn't know that Ed had had a little roundabout with them before he picked me up. So he knew what the terrain was. And they kept throwing plates, and then I had to pay for the broken plate.
Yeah, Frank had this little book, and at the end of every day, he would jot down all the things. I said, Frank, just tell me how much it is. Don't tell me about it. He never charged me. I must have spent $400 or $500 more than you did, Frank.
On broken plates.
On broken plates, if nothing else. That's right.
Oh, God. But then we got back to the, he didn't like what I did that night because I was writing the little book and pissed him off. So he says to me, I'm going to Egypt by myself.
Did I say that?
Yeah.
That was the dumbest thing I ever did. Because being with Frank and being able to discuss different things we saw, but you were getting itchy feet, and we started fighting like a couple of
Well, I
bitches.
couldn't keep up with you and the girls because you were single and I wasn't.
Yeah, that's right.
It was complicated.
And you had a brand new, amazing wife.
Yeah. She's here somewhere.
Berta, but then when you came back, Frank, you started working on your house, and maybe you can tell us a little bit about that, your home in Santa Monica. In terms of, I mean, that was taking an existing structure and wrapping another structure around it, which at the time was somewhat...
Well, I actually did one in Hollywood Hills before on St. Ives Drive where we did that. It was, the office was slow, and so everybody chipped in and bought this house, and we were going to make a lot of money selling it. And it was a nice house, and we built a thing around it. Not like this. I mean, it was, the thing around it was the same style as the thing inside of it. But once I got that idea, when we got here, I had to mess with it. I couldn't leave it. I couldn't move into it the way it was. It was just too cute. It was a Dutch gambrel thing. And it was the only two-story house in the neighborhood. And I thought it had an iconic presence and importance.
And a pink
Yeah,
surface.
pink. And so I built a house around it with the idea that the house inside would still be seen so that I wasn't taking away the two-story thing.
How were the people in the area?
They hated me.
Yeah.
The lady down the street was a lawyer, 2 doors down. And she went to the city and filed a thing against me. And the mayor at the time was a Native American, Indian, from an Indian thing, Donna Swink. And so she called me and said, can I come over and look at your house? I'm getting a lot of complaints. And she came over and stood in front of it and started howling with laughter. She thought it was the greatest thing she'd ever seen. And then that lady that was pissed off, 2 doors down, copied it, built a house around her house. And then sold it. I don't know where she is, but it was very cheap. I didn't have any money, and so it was all done very cheap. But I think I would never have done it if I hadn't been involved with some of these guys and seen combines and things like that. But
it was the first time that you used your own money on a project and really, you're living in the space. It was
Yeah.
really kind of an R&D project to try out some ideas that you were experimenting with.
well, I was looking for that line between the reality of the old house and the new house and blurring the edges so that you kind of wondered whether something was meant to be or something was not meant to be. And the greatest compliment I ever got was from Arthur Drexler, who came to a dinner there. And he called Philip Johnson up afterwards, and Philip called me to tell me what he said. He said, I saw these leaks, water leaks, and on the wood, and I saw some footprints on the wood, and he said, were those supposed to be there? Or were those intentional? And that's when I realized, bravo, he got it.
Thumbs up.
Yeah.
Well, and you and Chuck also got involved with a handful of real estate ventures in the Venice area. Chuck, maybe you can...
Chuck and Laddie, yeah.
Yeah, tell us just a little bit about what Venice was like at that time, because it was much different than it is today.
Well, it was, when I first went down, it was the land of the wanted and the unwanted. And it was kind of amazing because everything was happening. The Beat Generation was still there, the Hells Angels were there, all these artists were there, and you could do anything you want. And this was like full hippie time, and it was a wonderful place to be, and everybody was there. It was a really nice community, and these guys were smart. I mean, here you are at the beach, and it was residential, commercial, mixed use, and so anything went. It was a really kind of a terrific place. It wasn't the marina. It wasn't Santa Monica.
And you and Frank were involved with a handful of development projects.
Well, the ghetto, there were a lot of vacant lots in the ghetto, and Venice was dirt cheap, really. And I had this idea that, you could buy a lot for like $15,000. And so Laddie and I got the money together, and we bought this lot, and we made Frank our partner. All you have to do is design this thing, we'll build it, we'll sell these 3 units, and we'll take the profit and buy 2 or 3 or 4 other lots. And we
So
were
this is
gonna
the Indiana
impregnate
lot.
the ghetto with artist studios.
So I
The
never
idea
got a
was that-
cent. To this day.
Well,
what
the
the
deal was,
idea-
if it would have been successful, there would have been a lot of artists could still be living in Venice today because they could have owned their studios. And it was the idea of trying to make Venice kind of a permanent artist place, which I guess was kind of a
Didn't
harebrained
Craig
idea.
Kaufman buy one and then he dropped out of the purchase?
Yeah, I think so, yeah.
Who was that?
Craig.
Kaufman.
Yeah, Craig was a weird guy.
No, the funniest thing happened is they gave me this survey for the thing. And I designed it for that survey, which had the north arrow. It turned out going in the wrong direction. So I designed that building for the other side of the street. And they were building it, and I was out of town, and I came back and looked at it, and I said, "Hey, you're on the wrong side of the street."
It's interesting. All these stories, there's 2 versions. History's weird because if
You
you
don't
ask
remember?
others to tell the same, thing, it comes out different.
You don't remember that?
I went down there, and Laddie and I were walking around. It was supposed to be artist studios, and we're going, Jesus Christ, this place is cold and dark, and there's something wrong with it. And I called you, and I invited you down. I said, Frank, what the hell? The patios are on the shady side of the building, and the ocean's down there. And you said, you showed me the wrong lot. You showed me the one across the street. And I said, I bought the lot. You think I'd point out the wrong piece of real estate? And then we did the research, and we found out that the survey had been flipped. But I didn't show you the wrong lot. Anyway,
It's a better story if I tell it that way.
It is interesting, though. I mean, Frank got to do whatever he wanted there. So,
Well,
what was
and
the
the
theme of
sheathing,
this? One was a stairway, one was a fireplace, and what was the theme of the third one? Anyway,
A bay window.
But the outside of the building, the sheathing on each one of the 3 were totally different, right?
Yeah. It's right.
So
That's
one
right.
was stucco, one is, what was the,
Asbestos
Plywood, and
shingles, wasn't it?
it was
Plaster, plywood, and asphalt shingle was the green stuff. And then the insides were just raw, and you could do anything you want inside.
Dennis Hopper ended up buying all 3
all
of them.
3 of them.
right, and that's where Dennis ended up living. But that idea, Frank, of an artist coming to the space and making it their own, with the Ron Davis house that you designed for him, that was also part of the concept, that maybe you can explain it in terms of how that process went.
Well, Ron was making drawings of perspective, and he asked me to do a studio for him. And so I got the idea, and I knew after spending time with him that he did not know how to make a 3-dimensional object. There was no way this guy could make a sculpture that represented those paintings, those perspective drawings. And so I got the notion that I was going to teach him how to do it. So we had a little room and studio or something, and we made a model of the site, and then we gave Ron these pieces of string with thumbtacks, and he could make a drawing that he understood how to make in the space over the model. And then we took those and made those shapes into the building. And he seemed to be tracking it pretty well. And then when the building was finished, he moved in, and the worst thing happened, he stopped painting for 2 years. And
I thought what was great about that place, so if I can interject,
Sure.
was that you didn't locate the bathroom, you didn't locate the kitchen or any, it was just a big empty place,
Yeah.
an enclosure. And then Frank, with his unique mind, said, let's move in a porta potty and a kitchen that was on wheels, and we'll roll them around until they get located. Once they're located, then that's it. You must have had plumbing coming up in various appropriate places.
Well, the floor was built off the ground, so there was a crawl space, so you could put in anyway.
I see.
That was an idea.
So who decided where the bathroom and the kitchen went?
He
You or
did.
Ron?
He did.
Did he do
Well,
the
that
right
was
thing?
one of your first efforts
Well,
of getting away from the post and lintel
Yeah.
and soaring the ceiling, along with the hay barn you did for the
well,
O'Neills.
that's why he wanted this, because he got the hay barn. He saw the hay barn.
Tell them about the hay barn.
I should? Okay.
Tell them.
Oh, okay. Well, Ed had some wild friends, and one of them was from Mission Viejo that had that big ranch. And the lady of the house was Donna O'Neill, who we all love very much. And Donna's husband, who owned the ranch,
275,000 acres.
yeah. He was very tight, right?
Definitely.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And so Donna wanted a hay barn because she raised horses and she rode horses. And so I went down there and I took I had a meeting with them and I showed them these drawings and pulled. But it was kind of a love affair about Donna. I mean, I was really trying to please her.
We don't have a reproduction of the
We
hay
do
barn
not.
here?
Anyway, it's a tilted roof, and it's corrugated, and it's on these poles. And it was just, you stack hay in it. But it got the light, so there were times when the pole, you didn't see the roof, and it was just looked like these poles were stuck up, and they weren't holding anything. And that was kind of interesting. And
That's great.
and it cost $2,000 to build because that was the budget Dick gave me.
But that was the project that got Ron Davis interested in working with you.
Right, he saw that, and I think he was trying to do three-dimensional things, and he didn't know how, and it was a frustration of some kind, I think.
Well, from that great drawing by Uccello of the big circle in perspective.
Yes.
With various cells within that thing. And it's a great drawing, or an etching. When did Uccello, 16th century, 17th century, something like that? Ron spotted it, or maybe he didn't, and he made a whole series of wonderful paintings with resin.
Yeah.
Two of which we have in the Pacific Standard
and
Time
then
show
he
here.
put, what's that material you put so you can pull it apart?
Velcro.
Velcro. He'd put Velcro on the wall, he'd put Velcro on the back of the piece, and they were only an eighth to a quarter of an inch thick. And he'd just slap them up there. That's how he installed them. He was a real thinker, really interesting guy. And I think we drove him mad.
One of the other projects that several of you collaborated on was Rebecca's Restaurant. And maybe Tony or Peter, you can talk a little bit about that. I mean, that was really one of the first times that kind of the restaurant was this really...
Are the doors still there?
No, that was years ago. They sold all the stuff out of that and
Yeah.
didn't understand. I told them this is, a great classic interior that eventually is only going to get better and better, like Maxime's in Paris. It's a thing that you have to understand, but they didn't understand it. And this door, which had become very badly rusted, was bought by a couple who were married who had met each other there, and they hung it up in the middle of their house. So that's a nice.
I don't know what that is.
But Rebecca's was a restaurant that Bruce Martyr, who owned several restaurants in LA, that he asked Frank to design the exterior and the interior, and then Frank, you in turn asked several of your artist friends. But this was a place where the architecture was almost as important as the food, and almost, Peter, you did some work, Ed.
Well, Frank did these great metal things that he hung from the ceiling that looked like alligators. There they are.
Like
up
big
there.
crocodiles?
They were
Crocodiles.
crocodiles. You
Right.
got to be able to tell the difference between.
I've never been able to tell the difference.
So Frank, was this an opportunity that you could ask several of your friends to collaborate and provide some artwork for
Yeah,
the interior?
I always like to do that, but I usually failed at it. But
I thought that was pretty successful.
that was good, yeah, because Peter did the velvets.
It all worked. It worked real well.
Velvet,
I used
you
to
did
love to go in
velvets.
that place.
There
Tony
he
did-
is.
Tony did the
And
front
Frank's
doors.
directions as a collaborator was, do whatever you like.
Yeah, that's right.
Oh, no, he
You
did.
have to
He
trust
did.
people.
No, what he said to me, he said, make it bigger. That was it.
And Peter, you created a painting for the Walt Disney Concert Hall.
Yeah, yes, yes.
And nobody has paid any attention to it. We have to have a party to celebrate it. Because he did it, he put it there, nobody paid for it. There it is.
That's it.
Huh?
That's it. I think,
Oops,
just a minute,
back.
let's go back one. Yeah. Not a great shot, but,
It's the only art in the concert hall.
and it's beautiful.
It is beautiful.
And nobody paid for it?
No,
Yeah, nobody
you
paid
all,
for it?
you really should all go down and have a look.
But it sounded like you almost had to install it yourselves at some point.
Well, it came about because of a peculiar circumstance. Frank was, I was doing some paintings at the time that Frank sort of liked. And he said, why don't we do one of these for Disney? Am I saying this right? Is this the way it happened?
Yeah, the preface to all of it was the hall was going to open and nobody wanted to put any art in it. They kept saying the building's the art. And I said, well, I think this is an opportunity to have all the people that I played with over the years put their stuff in it. And so I wanted all these guys.
And my name was Alexander, so I was the top of the
And
list.
many more. And nobody down there would hear of it. They didn't want to do that.
So Chuck is second.
Didn't they put Sam Francis in there and didn't take him out?
No, somebody wanted to put this, but those didn't work in there. I think we tried one that didn't work. The space is so big that you had to really, even Sam's stuff.
What about the carpets
Where?
at the Disney?
I tried to get Billy to do it.
I did it.
You did them?
You didn't like them.
I don't think it was me that did
It
them.
was you.
Were they not any good?
Well, what
was
Billy
wrong?
does.
They look
in
like
his-
that.
What he does. What he does in his home, he buys yardage and he just pieces it together randomly, willy-nilly, all through
Billy.
his place. Billy does that.
Yeah.
And I think that was what you wanted to do at Disney Hall, right?
Yeah, I had some overseers at Disney Hall,
I'm sure you did.
so I couldn't do, I mean, if I'd had my way, it would have been filled with, it still should be. We should still go down and do a raid, like
A raid on it, yeah.
The best part was when you said, look, let's just put it up. There was a whole bunch of, the Eli Broad wanted to put some pieces in, and so did the Mocha wanted to put some pieces in, and everybody wanted to do something in the building. And so we had the painting. It didn't go in immediately. And then at some point, Frank said, fuck it, let's just get some scaffolding and put it up. And that's what happened. So, one day you're there and the scaffolding's going up. And
well,
there's
I
the
thought
painting.
people would see it and would like it, and then they would sort of celebrate it, and then we could go on with
Something else.
to add stuff, but it's never happened. They don't even know it's there now.
They don't look up.
Frank, tell us something about the temples that Tony did in collaboration with you.
I
in
thought
terms
she was
of-
the moderator.
And so I cede to Ed at any point. But
I
that's,
have a big mouth, I
That's
can't help
really
it.
nice of you.
no, but we can talk about, that's actually a historical collaboration that is now a current project that you're both working on. And Tony, maybe you can talk about Le Puissant Reparade.
I'm sorry, what about the temples?
Well,
wanna-
the silver.
Oh, here we are.
Talk
Yes,
about the
these are
evolution.
pieces.
I loved the silver one. And he didn't have any place to put it, so he put it in my office.
Also the polychrome one.
Did you put that?
Yeah.
Oh, I forgot that.
It was,
Berta remembers. But, and I was at that time, when you make buildings, they have the skin, and everybody was trying to get the metal skin not to oil can. So, like Richard Meyer figured it out, and people, but it was an expensive thing to do it. And after spending a couple of years looking at Tony's crinkled metal, I became very enamored with it, and then tried it on a building, right? And I kept trying. It works great, so I kept trying it. So it kind of comes from having spent time with that. And then recently, they've been bought by Patty McKillen, who has a Roman vineyard in where?
South
Chateau
of France.
Lacoste, outside
Lacoste,
of
yeah.
Aix.
And so he bought those and is installing them, and Tony asked me to design the installation. And we've had a great, frustrating time doing it. But it's going to happen. It's going to be great. It's going to sit in the vineyard. And
But it's much more than an installation.
Yeah.
It is.
Because you're designing a music pavilion that these works will be in.
well, the music
Concert.
pavilion, I designed it for the Serpentine, and then those are made for 3 months, and then somebody buys them. And Patty bought mine, and you had a picture of it before. And then, there it is, yeah. So he moved it from London to here.
And Tony's pieces, how do they fit in?
They're not next to that. They're off in the hills by themselves. The guy's buying art and putting it all around. I don't know some of the other artists. Do you know them?
Well, I think
So you have
there's a guy
Jean
named
Nouvel.
Sarah right next.
Huh?
There's a guy named Sarah right next to your thing.
There is.
Yeah, there's a hill. Right, you saw it, but you forgot it. I can understand that.
Well, he's the guy that said I am a plumber, so I sort of dismissed him.
So it's a
Successful.
600-acre vineyard, and Jean Nouvel is doing an aluminum winery. Tadeo Andau is doing several buildings.
They're built, yeah.
There's several structures here, and many artists are installing sculptures. So it's a very large site, and I think it opens this summer, right?
I don't know. I'm going to do a bridge for him somewhere.
But Frank's structure it's not an environment for it. It's a response to my sculptures that makes a new sculpture. And my sculptures,
not this
which
thing,
were
right?
made which were made between 66 and 68, when I was 25 and 26. Then you lived with them in the early 70s, and they're architectural in reference. Here's a picture of them in these shapes that Frank is devising. So mine are, it's the marriage of New York and Athens. So they're buildings within buildings. And then Frank, in turn, is building a building which, in fact, turns my architectural sculptures into objects. And it's really a collaborative structure, you know, a true collaboration. Because my pieces no longer exist as what they were, but I feel as something really marvelous and unique. So it's really and it's something that evolved over decades and decades of experience. It wasn't, Frank's involvement was very intimate and real as opposed to arbitrary and assigned. So I can hardly wait to see them myself.
Right, because the first pieces you started in the 70s, and now you're still working on commingling them.
Yeah, and I was also, this is a good opportunity to say that we've been talking about all of the interchange of ideas and visions, but also giving each other a kind of bravery. And
I think that's the important
thing that
point.
Frank now
Yeah.
shows all of us is how you can deal with fantastic success, because a lot of us at times are even stymied by moderate success, because being Homo sapiens sapiens, we are social animals, and it's very difficult to disappoint the expectations of people who are putting their trust in you. And Frank has continued to be intuitive and use his success as a vehicle to be able to take risk and advance, which is an extraordinary emotional guide for us and support for all of us.
Yeah, but I remember when, about a year ago, that we had a meeting, I can't remember exactly where it was, and I remember distinctly telling him if he didn't get his shit together, we'd have to cut him loose.
But Larry, you always say you can't imagine a time, that you don't even remember a time when you didn't know Frank. But as Tony is saying, that sometimes there's more indirect collaborations, and maybe you can tell us about the Peter Lewis project that morphed into a serious project for you, the Stickman.
Well, that was an interesting time because I was looking for, any way to make a living, and even employment crossed my mind. And Frank asked me to look at the models of a house he was building for someone, and so I went over to his office, and I honestly couldn't see how anything I could do could interface with these giant forms of fish and the scales of fish, and the bones of fish, and the veins of fish, and fillets of fish, the whole this stuff, and it was all to be covered in a white Carrara marble. And when I saw the models,
I don't remember that.
You don't remember that?
Not the Carrara marble part, no.
That's all right. It's your story.
So I came up with an idea that would conceptually work, and it would successfully make the whole place disappear. And Frank didn't like that idea so much, but he said if I could make a good presentation of it, he'd pass it by the client, who had a construction budget for this house of something like $82.5 million. That didn't even include a roll of toilet paper, as far as I know.
It was never built, so don't.
Yeah, well, anyways, I came up with this idea, and I tried to illustrate it for Frank, and out of the attempt to make something that used his images of his models, I learned how to use a computer program that would allow me to draw over the photos of the models, and in learning how to use the tools in this very complicated thing, I was making little gestures and printing them out to see what the settings had to be and after I made the presentation to Frank and he said, okay, let's send it to Peter and see what he says, I pulled out a stack of these little sort of printouts that had nothing to do with the light piece, and I said, what do you think of these? I like this little calligraphy. And he said, oh, these are fantastic. What can you do with these? Forget about the light piece. And so he was virtually telling me to go kill myself and turn these things into kind of humanoid things. Anyways, his enthusiasm was quite infectious, and I went about pursuing forms that sort of looked like this. The genesis was the side of my thumb against the cursor ball of my computer, which drew little lines and stuff. And I got totally engaged with the whole thing, and it was, and then he called me to say, forget it, he's not going to do the house.
But he did commission you.
But he did build 2 of those pieces, and you didn't build your fucking house.
Well, didn't Richard Center have the cart and Richard out of the house then? Did you hear that? Yeah?
No, not of that.
You don't want to talk about the shape of the buildings and how Richard wanted to curve the steel and ended up with a torqued ellipses?
We don't really want to talk.
You don't want to hear about that? Okay.
No.
I thought as long as we're, where ideas come from.
Well,
that was
I
kind
mean,
of
it's
interesting.
clear for me that over these years that it was a powerful, powerful energy that was floating around that I got from this scene that I wasn't getting from the architecture world. And it was very, I mean, people, there wasn't a rush to hire me to do the stuff.
So how did Bilbao, how did that come about? Because that was the radical transformation of architecture in
Yeah, but that
the
was
20th century.
That was Tom Krenz.
Pardon?
Tom Krenz.
Tom Krenz
Yeah.
made that happen.
Yeah. So it's an art-centric kind of thing. I think I fall in that place, whether I put plumbing in or not. Right?
Well, you turn it inside out. I think you changed, radicalized architecture. And you didn't know how to do it at first, as I remember, until you found the CAT computer that could engineer the substructure to put the skin on.
Yeah.
Right?
CATIA, yeah. Which we use now. But
Pardon?
which we use a lot now.
Yeah.
But I think the thing I used to say when I would describe the inspiration from you guys was that you were really hands-on, like Billy made everything that he... And
Well, Billy was the star at that time.
I'd go to the studio and he was always sawing and cutting and making things.
He was the star. I
And-
take it back.
I think
What the hell does that mean?
Well, you did the best of anybody. And then Kenny was right behind you. And then everybody else came trundling along after that.
Well, you know that when I was at SC in architecture, when I was in second year, Craig Kaufman was in first year architecture.
He was the best.
He was brilliant.
Brilliant.
And he was, you know how he was, complaining. You can imitate him better than I can. And he didn't like the architecture school, and he got out and he went to UCLA, and then
That's where I met him.
yeah, and he knocked heads with Jan Stussy and Hooper and all those guys.
He just laugh at him,
I know.
hold his nose and squeal. And then sometimes I'd get to go on a joyride. His mother had a few dollars, bought him a new XKE Jaguar. And we used to race around Westwood, and he'd go right across somebody's driveway, up across the lawn, and throw a Brody to skid right, tear the whole lawn up and squeal with delight, and we'd race off. I shouldn't say that, he's dead now. And he was a great guy and a brilliant guy, but totally eccentric. He made the rest of us look like regular people.
But
We
Frank,
had regular voices.
Regular voices, yeah.
that idea of being able to experiment with different materials and, you know, having a little fluidity and not having
But it was
everything-
hands-on. It wasn't like you'd think about it a lot. You just grab something and do something with it.
It was
right?
intuitive.
Yeah. And you built intuitively on, so they never knew where they were going with it. And I love that. It just, if you know, you've heard a lot of artists and people say this, that if you knew where you were going, you wouldn't go there. And I think that probably is consistent with all of us, that you're willing to try things within, I mean, there's enough constraints out there in all of our lives that hold you back from escaping into outer space. But
Yeah, but making a building, if I can intercede, which I always do, so you have to deal with not only the client, the building department, your contractor, and all that. We're in our studios. All we have to do is make these things that could be paintings or could be sculptures or glass transparencies or whatever. But
Yeah.
Frank, the complexity of that boggles my mind.
no,
I
but-
don't understand how you do it. You're some kind of a genius as far as I'm concerned.
He's beyond a genius.
Beyond a genius.
He's the best thief in the world.
The best what?
Thief.
Best thief in the world.
And
Okay.
you have to be able to steal the right things and make them right.
Uh-oh, somebody's
That
cell phone.
somebody's cell phone is,
It's not
mine.
It's right out there somewhere.
Somebody's beeping.
Alejo, I think that's you.
is that yours, Frank?
Nope.
Okay, good. Maybe we have time for a few questions from the audience, and we have some people with microphones. So if there's some questions, if you raise your hand, we'll have somebody come down and hand you the
I
microphone.
think we wore everybody out.
And Irwin, if
No.
you're up there, you'd better stand up and throw something out there.
Oops.
That's
okay.
him.
Don't- It's okay.
Did something come
Nobody got hurt.
sailing down all?
there's-
I was going to ask, all of you guys work with materials, and is there at what point does the material come in? You guys just kind of choose the material or the form and kind of following nature or whatever it is? Is that part of the exploration, or is it that you choose the material first and work with it and figure out, you know, I don't know, the nature
Douglas
of the material,
surplus.
or like finding the lines in it?
There's no methodology there. Who's there first, the donkey or the tail?
Thanks, Ed.
And that's coming from someone who uses all different types of material on a regular basis and is constantly exploring different techniques and using different things. And Ed, maybe you can talk just briefly about your piles of rubble and one of the latest.
Oh yeah, my latest thought, well, it's not that late. It happened several years ago. And I saw these giant rubble piles. And then I discovered this strange architect, Paulo Soleri, who did a lot of things with earth. And I was asked to do this winery. I asked Frank, we sent out letters to all the famous. I said, as long as you're going to build this winery, the Chapelets, you get the best architect there is. But all of them put it off for a year. He said, I have to get started right now. I said, well, why don't we just take a pile of earth and put a wire cage around it and some pylons going down, shoot it with concrete, pull all the earth out, and there you have your winery. He didn't like that. So finally it ended up being a giant pyramid, as you can see here. The light part across there is below the earth. So then you have to drive down through these big doors I made out of huge wine casks, and there's a balcony up there. and I made a glass cube up at the top, all of Larry Bell. And you would come in with sliding doors. Did I just lose my connection?
I think you did.
Where's my connection?
Did it
You've
flop
been
over?
edited.
Do I need it? Can you hear?
No, I think you need it. Here, Catherine will help you.
Where's that sound guy?
Sound gal.
Can you hear now?
Yes.
I don't want you to miss anything. We're having a good time. This is sort of a real event. Thank you for putting this together.
Yeah.
And I love being with all these guys. We all have a long hate-love relationship, and but it's primarily love.
Yeah.
If we can,
I have a question here. Frank, you've inspired a lot of people
Where are you?
and continue to. This is sort of a question for everybody up there, is what is your inspiration as you continue on in your storied careers? What really sort of drives you?
Well, I think probably the same. I'm not going to speak for these guys, but as you live, you experience stuff. You read. You see a painting. You see a sculpture. You see a building. You see, and you respond to the time you're in. I think if you let yourself do it and don't get self-conscious about it, which is what these guys taught me, something comes of it. Something comes of it. And the world edits it for you. You're going to get enough pushback and editing over time that you have to work through. And it's that playing against the house, as it were, playing and just trying to squeak through the cracks and make something that you feel good about. And over time, you develop a kind of a personal language that's recognizable, which is unfortunate. I wish, the biggest thing I think all of us try is to not do that. But unfortunately, nature we can't escape. But as the world goes on, circumstances change, which require you to do something else. So I think it's just responding to the time, the place. That includes the economic downturn now. Technology that's available with the computer, we can cut construction costs by eliminating change orders. So every building, change orders are 15%. So you can eliminate a lot of that. And so these create opportunities, I think. And I think we all do that. It's intuitive. Billy went to Hawaii and he changed everything he was doing, right? He became a Hawaiian. Then he moved to Canada and he started a different line of things. And I think
Different kinds of passive-aggressive behavior.
So I think it's a response to time and place and this guy's so prolific. He makes so much stuff, so much beautiful stuff, and he keeps changing it as he goes. And where does he get the courage to do it and to it's amazing. So I think I always think you don't look a gift horse in the mouth. You just shut up and do it. And right?
I think that's all you do. You just, I think you have ideas and you pursue those. And the thing that separates us, say, from craftsmen is we don't care about the craft. We don't care about the finished object so much. We're in pursuit of an idea, and when you try to transform these ideas into reality, you have to struggle with them.
What's happening to the image on the wall there? They cut it off. We see it.
They ran out of money.
Anyway, it's a pursuit of eventually you'll get it right, you know. I think as you try to do things, you realize there are other possibilities, better ways of doing it, and you just never get there. That's why we keep doing it, right?
So I shared a building with Chuck in Venice, and I was in there quietly making drawings and stuff, and I hear this sawing.
The chainsaws.
And he made chainsaw paintings. And
Are they up there?
No.
and
I'm the cop.
they are powerful pieces of work, but it drove me nuts. I had to work with earplugs and stuff.
Well, it wasn't just the two of you. There was several artists in the studio.
At that point, I think it was just down to the two of us.
Yeah.
Over the years, a lot of people had been in that building.
Chris Burden and
Chris Burden and Ellen McCullum and
David
Karen
Deutsch.
Carson
Yeah.
and Pat Hogan and
Tom Woodle.
Tom Wood, a whole bunch of people over the years. But eventually it was just the two of us.
Well, Pat Hogan was amazing because he had, was it multiple sclerosis or something
I
like
don't
that?
know exactly what it was.
But he
but
was
it was
totally
degenerative.
paralyzed finally, and he painted with the brush in his mouth and did these amazing little paintings.
Well, David Deutsch helped him out a lot. He eventually made him an easel that could go up and down and spin around.
Oh, I see.
And he could control the easel and hold the brush in his mouth at the same. It's pretty amazing. He did some pretty good stuff.
But I think the main thing is there was a lot of crossover, cross-fertilization, with some drinking and smoking in between. But I always felt it was very loving and very, and it still is. And so I consider these, they're my family, kind of.
We're the tribe, as Ed says. Huh? It's a tribal thing.
Yeah, it
Mom.
is a tribal thing.
And Billy insults us all the time.
He can't.
It's an
he
easy
can't
mark.
help it though. He can't help it.
Huh?
I finally learned that.
You can't help it?
He can't help it.
No.
I actually think that's a really nice note to end on. Let's end on the love part of the relationship. So thank you to all our guests tonight.